right, HBCU family. I'm Kyle T. Mosley of HBCU Legends on Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation. I'm here with an icon, a pioneer, and a legend himself. You know, growing up, I heard his voice and we watched BET, but we also watched him on NBA, the TNT. You can just go on and on and on about all the things he's done for sports, especially Black sports, as well as the college ranks for HBCUs. It's none other than Mr. Charlie Neal himself. How you doing, sir?
I'm fine, Kyle. How are you?
I'm doing well. Look, we had a chance to chop it up briefly after the Texas Southern game. You were talking to us about your honor that was bestowed upon you on Tuesday night, the Charlie Schenkel Award. And I watched the whole program from start to finish. I was kind of taken back because I wanted to hear from Charlie Neal, and they only had a little snippet of you being presented the plaque, and that was it. So I felt, no, we got to do something more. Let's hear from the man himself about that honor, as well as what's going on with HBCU Go. So talk to me, Charlie. How do you feel about your prestigious career? You've been doing this since, 1971, and you have just been pretty much the architect for how Black college sports should be reported and covered. Talk to me about that.
Well, I was very fortunate to have the opportunity. Started out in television in Washington, D.C., doing just local television sports. And when Bob Johnson came along in 1980 and created Black Entertainment Television, that was the platform in which I've been able to do the things that I've done for the last 43 years, going on year 44 now. With historically Black colleges and universities, which was one of the reasons that I was able to receive the Chris Schenkel Award this past week. But more importantly, it gave me a platform to expose, tell the stories, and bring to the forefront what's happening around historically Black colleges and universities as far as athletics is concerned. Because if you remember, prior to BET coming along, you may have seen one game a year, maybe Grambling and somebody on ABC or something like that. And that was about all the exposure that HBCUs were getting at that particular time.
Right.
And BET and ESPN came along the same year, 1980. And of course, ESPN was not doing any concentrations on historically Black colleges and universities at that time either. So BET was the forefront of giving that exposure, and it gave me an opportunity. And when I, tell people about the Chris Schenkel Award, I'm very humbled to receive it. But also, I give credit to the players that I was able to tell the stories about, the coaches that allowed me to tell those stories, and the athletic administrators who led us onto their campuses to expose the culture and the very fine student athletes that they had, and that's where the award belongs. I was just given the stage to go ahead and tell the stories, but they're the ones that gave me the opportunity to do that.
Well, you told the story and you helped be able to bridge the gap, because a lot of people, like you said, weren't too familiar with what's happening. A lot of people in the SWAC not too familiar with what happens over at the MEAC, and as well as likewise with the MEAC with SWAC. But just having you on camera and having your voice being able to tell those stories really helped me out as a young guy. I could just say that because I remember when you called some, I think it was a Florida A&M game, and that was like my first exposure to FAMU. We heard about the band, but we didn't know about the team.
Sure.
And that was excellent for me. And I can still recollect that after all these years. So thank you so much. But you said something that's critical, and what has been transparent in the landscape of college sports, especially for Black college sports, is the student athlete, and being able to stress upon a lot of people the importance of the talent that exists in HBCUs.
Mhm.
And I know you're a part of selection committees, and we were just speaking about the HBCU Legacy Bowl. Why is that so important nowadays to have uh, broadcasting avenues like HBCU Go, as well as the others, to be able to expose the talent and tell their story and allow some of these young men to get the opportunities to get into the professional ranks?
Yeah, well, the one thing about it, you cannot overstate how important exposure is to the universities. And I'll just go back and tell a quick story about when BET first started in 1980. Of course, BET was an unknown entity. People didn't know anything about it. And when Bob Johnson approached the different universities and colleges and saying, listen, we want to come in and tell the stories of your student athletes, a lot of the schools were very skeptical. They
Hmm.
were wondering, what is BT getting out of this? You're not paying us all these right fees, and this is what. And BT didn't have the money at the time because they were just starting out to pay the kind of dollars that schools were looking for. And we were saying to them, we're trying to give you exposure. We want to tell your story. We want to put you on the forefront. And some of the schools downright turned BET down and said, look,
Really?
it's okay. We don't want to be bothered. When 10 years later, they were knocking on the door, tearing the door down, trying to bring the SWAT team in to get on television. So it had its purpose. And today, you remember BET stopped televising HBCU sports back in the early 2000s, and that's when ESPNU came along. But in the meantime, ESPNU picked up some of that slack that happened because I did the first ever football game on ESPNU. That was Benedict and Morehouse College down in
My,
Atlanta,
my alma
Georgia.
mater.
Yeah, and John David Washington, Denzel's son, was
Yes,
playing for
right.
Morehouse in that team. And so this we go back in those days, and ESPNU started to pick up some of the slack that BT dropped, and then HBCU Go with Curtis Simons, who was a senior vice president at BET in marketing. And when he left BET, he wanted to continue that tradition of broadcasting and exposing HBCUs, and thus founded HBCU Go. And that's where we are today. And that's why it's so important to continue to tell these stories, not to let people forget about the Eddie Robinsons, because a lot of the young people don't know Eddie Robinson or the Marino Castles or
Correct.
the John Merritts or the W.C. Gordons. They don't know those people, and it's important to tell those stories. They don't know the Jerry Rice's story from there. They may have heard of him as a member of the 49ers,
That's
and
right.
even the young people today are not that familiar. I was just at the National Football Foundation awards dinner earlier this week out in Las Vegas, and I was with some players from HBCUs who are getting awards, such as Davius Richard from North Carolina Central, Lupert Danellis from Benedict College, and Kenny Gallup from Howard University, and they were amazed. They're meeting the Marcus Allens of the world and the Reggie Bushes. They
Right.
didn't, they didn't get a chance to. Luke Kuechly's and Peyton Manning's. They didn't know these people so much so when they were playing, and they're getting a history. So it's important that we keep that dialogue and going, and that exposure going, so that they know what's happening, and that we can go back even when we do our games and relive or talk about some of the older players, some of those old timers who made it possible for them to be where they are today. They don't know Walter Payton.
That's right.
The running back at Jackson State probably heard his name because there's something on the campus that probably reminds them of Walter Payton, but they don't know Walter Payton. The people at Mississippi Valley, they don't know Jerry Rice, except that the stadium is named Rice-Totten Stadium. But I mean, other than that, they don't really know them. So it's important. So when we do our games, we not only talk about the student athletes today, but we talk about those student athletes who made the name for those schools back in the day.
Yeah, I think that's why your apologies. Do you hear some feedback?
No, I don't.
Okay. I think that's why if you listen to some of your commentary and your play by play, when you start to kind of weave in the history behind the schools and, like you said, some of the old players from yesteryear. That's what makes your commentary so much more interesting and gives it more depth than I would listen to, let's say, some of the commentators from the CBS network when it comes to the SEC and things to that nature. But when you talk about what's happening with the current guys and kind of weave those guys in, it's great to hear, because there's so much of a legacy that has been missing for such a long time. And like you said, those young people need to know who these guys are and the importance and the impact that they had on college football from yesteryear and transcends into today. All right. So talk to me about Danellis as well as Gallup and Richard. You had some time to spend with those guys, and I was going to ask you about that. How impressed were you to have two HBCU young men represented to be a part of the Campbell Trophy? And that's very special to be a great student scholar, to be in that right, sitting next to Bo Nix and the rest of those guys. Talk to me about
it. It was great because I got a chance to spend some time with Looper Dennis from Benedict College. Quite an impressive young man. He's getting his working on his doctorate and master's in psychology. Wow. And so we were laughing and kidding. I was kidding him, and I told him, I said, I was a psychology major in college. I said, I psyched him into thinking I could broadcast. So he said, what made you? He said, what made you? And he's quite a young man. I mean, a personable individual and quite a gentleman. And he says, well, what made you? Why did you think you wanted to be in psychology? I said, because nobody else could spell it. I said, so I figured, we joked about it, but I was very impressed with him as an individual. He's a defensive end, and we were laughing. I said, you're a little small for a defensive lineman. I said, can you play linebacker? We were laughing about that. He says, I'm good at covering them out in the flat, but if they go upfield on me, I'm in trouble. So, I mean, that was the kind of weekend we had, just sitting down talking. I got a chance to Davis Richard, quite a young man. This is the second year he's been a finalist for that award, the Campbell Award. And and has led his team, North Carolina Central, for the last couple of years. We'll be playing, both him and Danellis will be playing in the Legacy Bowl in February down in New Orleans at Tulane Stadium. And Davis, just a gentleman. I got a chance to talk to him at the MEAC Media Day back during the summer, and got a chance to hang out with him again this past weekend with his family. And I mean, just quite a nice young man. And then Kenny Gallup, the young man from Howard University, who was this MEAC Defensive Player of the Year. He was on hand also. And Kenny, just quite a gentleman, and just and his family, his mom and dad. And it's so ironic. I ran into his dad, and his dad came up and told Kenny, he says, Charlie Neal did my games when I played. He played at Norfolk State for Willie Bailey. And I told Kenny, I said, now when you come and tell me that I did, when your kid starts playing and he comes up and says, oh, you did my dad and my granddad's game. I said, I've been around for a while.
Wow. That's deep history right there.
Yes, it was. It was quite his dad, Kenny Sr., was on hand with his mom, great people. And it was just an honor to be around it. Plus his younger brother. His younger brother is a defensive back, also just a freshman, finishing up his freshman year at Howard University, much taller than Kenny. And I was kidding his brother. I said, boy, you're a little taller than your brother. I said, who's the best athlete? So I had that feud going in a whole bit. So, but it was just a fun weekend, not only to be around them, but all of the, to hang out with Bo Nix and hang out with Tagovailoa. You know what I'm talking about, the quarterback.
His brother.
Not Talia. Hanging out with them and all of those young men who are true student athletes. The average grade point average for those young men that we saw that were candidates for that award, the Campbell Award, had a 3.6 average, grade point average. And so that's saying something, because that's the true meaning of the phrase student athlete. And that was what was more impressive than anything.
Very impressive. Very impressive. Even listening to how they spoke, and I heard a couple of their interviews, especially Danelis, when he was talking to the NFF about just being honored getting there and how humble he was.
He is
just a tremendous young man. And his coach, Chinnis Berry, couldn't say more glowing things about him when he and I first spoke a couple of months ago about who he was as a person. He said, Kyle, this guy hasn't got anything less than a B the entire time being at Benedict College. So that's awesome. And let's talk about Chinnis Berry, so to speak. A lot of rumors came out today, and I called him to find out if those rumors were true about him being the successor for Buddy Pugh over at South Carolina State. It seems to be on target. What's your thoughts?
Well, I had a long talk. He was in Las Vegas to support Lupert, and we talked on Tuesday, and there were three positions, three jobs that I know they were coming after him. I know Texas Southern came after him. Right. I know Southern University, who he was on the staff at Southern at one time. Right. They came after him. But like we him and I talked, and he did not come out and say it, but I can read between the lines, and he told me, he said there will probably be an announcement by the end of this week of where he's going to go. He was going to go home and pray on it. Yes. But unless if he winds up any place other than South Carolina State, it would be a total shock to me. Yeah. First of all, Buddy Pugh was telling some of the other schools, don't mess with my guy. So him and Buddy are very good friends. And like I said, I said this to Chinnis. I said, one of the things you have to look at realistically, first of all, if you take the South Carolina State job, you don't have to move.
Not far, right?
You live here in Columbia. It's right down the road, less than an hour's drive. I said, number two, you look at the number of coaches South Carolina State has had in the last 50 years. Was it 3? Willie Jeffries, Bill Davis, Buddy Pugh.
That's right.
That's right. They don't make wholesale changes. Southern has had quite a few coaches since Pete Richardson's left.
As well as Texas Southern.
Yeah, as well as Texas Southern. But I look more at what Southern is. Southern is a whole different ball game, I believe. In terms of what the expectations are, how their alumni association, and they look at they like homegrown people. If you're not one, if you didn't, they didn't like Pete Richardson when he first came there, but Pete Richardson turned things around. Right. So again, you have to grow on those people there. But it's not so much that way at a lot of other places. I'm still at lost for words as why they got rid of Coach Dooley. Now at Southern University, he didn't even let him finish the second year. They got to let him go before this Bayou Classic.
I couldn't understand it as well.
Yeah,
it was just weird.
It's interesting, but like you say, it's their playpen, their sandbox, and they can do how they want to with what they have. But I just hope Coach Berry winds up at South Carolina State. It'd be great for him. It'd be great for the program. It'd be great for the alumni. And, he's been around the block. He knows what it takes to win 2 back-to-back 11-0 seasons in the SIAC. Yes. You can't ask for much better than that.
Yeah. Outstanding man. That's what I like about Chinnis.
And the Division II FCA Coach of the Year.
Coach of the Year. Twice, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So when I looked at the landscape, and I have to be honest with you, Mr. Neal, I lobbied for him to come down to Texas in Houston. I thought he would do a tremendous job here at restoring this program for Texas Southern, especially all that they have been through with Clarence McKinney. These guys felt like they were just about to get over the hump with that program, and you called that last game, and
Yes.
God, that was just something to see. Because I remember I stepped out of the press room and I was listening to you call the game when the punter got his punt blocked and they returned it. And I was just like, oh my goodness, what is happening here? And that was just a swing. How Keith Jackson said, oh, Mo just swung around there, and it just wasn't the same. And I think that really was the telltale sign for Coach McKinney, who is a very fine man as well.
Yes.
I think very highly of him. He gave us at HBCU Legends a lot of access, and I appreciate him for that as well.
Well, I had a lot of respect for Coach McKinney. In fact, it's interesting because I just saw, I guess over the weekend or Monday earlier this week, Andrew Body put himself in the transfer portal.
He
was
did.
going. And I talked to Andrew when I was down there before the game. Andrew and I became pretty good friends over the last 2 years. I happened to do their, ironically enough, 2 years in a row, they lose their last game of the year.
Yes.
That is Texas Southern. They lost to Alabama A&M the year before after leading 21-0. And that win would have put them in the SWAC championship game. Andrew gets hurt, trying to go into the end zone. And then this year, he managed to play only one game, and that was the season opener against Prairie View. And then he got redshirted the rest of the season because he still never recovered from the injury that he suffered the year before.
Right.
And we talked, and he seemed to be coming along well. Great gentleman, great young man. If I had a kid or son, I would want him to be like Andrew Body. That's how much respect I have for that young man. So he texted me earlier this week and said that he was going in the transfer portal, and he kind of told me that when I was down there before that last game when we went to practice the day before they played Pine Bluff, that because the writing was on the wall that possibly Coach McKinney would not be back, and he'd already kind of made up his mind if that was going to happen, he was not coming back.
Right.
Because he has a lot of respect for Coach McKinney also. And talk to Coach McKinney. And Coach McKinney, he wasn't so concerned about himself because he says he's got a longevity in the Texas school system, a retirement system, and he's going to be okay for himself. But he's more concerned about his coaching staff and the staff that he had working for him at Texas Southern. But, it's the right of the administration to make moves the way they do. You don't always accept it. You don't always understand it. And I always look at the fact that, here's a young man who lost his starting quarterback, his preseason second team all-conference selection in Andrew Body. And they still, toward the end of the year, they made some great moves. They knock off Alcorn State in a crucial game in which the Braves needed to win in order to have a chance to play in the SWAC championship. So, you saw, and I had a chance, I think, to do 2 or 3 of their games throughout this past season at his Texas Southern, and you saw there was talent was there.
Yes.
Quarterback that came on in place of Body had a fairly decent year, and Andrew worked with him and helped him and was there to support him every step of the way. So, it's unfortunate that Texas Southern made that move. Again, 3 coaching vacancies in the SWAC again this year. I think it's 3.
Yes.
Yeah, Grambling. Yeah. Well, they're interviewing. In fact, I was just off the phone recently on this just before I came on with you, talking to Doug and Shaq. They were listening in on the interview process for the job for Grambling. So I know some of the names that they told me confidentially that they've been interviewing. So we'll see what happens. So you've got Southern, you got Texas Southern, and you have Grambling. Yeah, Southern, Texas Southern, and Grambling looking for coaches, and it's unfortunate, and who knows. Dooley might wind up at Grambling. He might wind up at Texas Southern. You just never know.
You never know these days. I listened to some of the names that were being talked about, especially over at Texas Southern. And I was kind of surprised to hear some of the names and some of the people who had expressed interest without getting a call from Texas Southern for the opportunity. So
I know Rick Comegys is one of them.
Yeah,
I know
Comedy.
he has an interest. I mean, and let me say this: there's some good jobs out there. There's some good coaches out there. I'm sure Brian Jenkins is probably one of those. Brian Jenkins, whose son this past year finished out his career at Prairie View after being at Alabama A&M, and Brian, the former coach at Bethune-Cookman and at Alabama A&M, and was it Alabama State, rather. He was at Alabama State, right? I'm sorry. Right. Brian Jenkins, and he was the offensive coordinator at Edward Waters this past season. So, I'm sure he's one of those who would like to get back into the position as a head coach. And there's a number of good young coaches out there that, sometimes you wind up administrators start chasing a Deion Sanders type model. And that is not going to work everywhere, number one. Number two, there's only one Deion Sanders. Okay? So you're not going to find them just by saying this is what we'd like to have. Sure, that's what you'd like to have. But Deion is not leaving Colorado to come back to Texas Southern. He's not leaving Colorado to go to Southern. He's not leaving Colorado to go to Grambling. So, again, do what you can and get what you can with the best that's out there.
Yeah, I agree. But I also agree about this. Let's go back to your career here. And last year, I spoke to Laurencia Moulton, I believe, right? And she talked to me about what was happening at HBCU Go as far as you were so pivotal to be able to have the first all-Black and all-female broadcasting crew to do a basketball game. And that was groundbreaking.
Yes.
So the question is, for this season, what will Charlie Neal do for the basketball season? What will you bring, as well as HBCU Go bring, to help us be able to say that was just awesome, because you guys did an awesome job and added more games to the schedule this season as well.
Well, we did on football, but we cut back on basketball, believe it or not.
Okay. I thought you added. Okay.
Yeah, we went double headers on football every Saturday. Okay. We had two crews. We had the syndicated crew and the cable crew. I was on the syndicated crew with John Kelly was my analyst, along with Courtney Tate and Nia Simone. On the other crew, you had James Hadnot, you had Antoine Bethea as an analyst, we had Laurencia Moulton, and they had a couple of young ladies that alternated as the other young ladies.
Sideline.
Yeah, sideline. Well, they weren't the sideline reporter. They called them they were like dealing with the fans and things of this nature. So sights and sounds reporter, that's what it was called. And so we doubled up on football this year. We had 23 football games. Last year in basketball, we did 61 games. We're only doing 32 this year, but they're all syndicated. We're not doing any games during the week. If you remember last year, we did Monday night games because the SWAC and the MEAC play on Monday. Right. We did some CIAA and SIC games during the week, Wednesdays and things of this nature. That's not happening this year. Everything's going to be on Saturday. And it's only going to be just the double headers between the women starting off first and then followed by the men's game. So that cut back on the number of games that we're doing. We will still, in what we've done with, I don't know if you saw our first game or our first two games that we've had. The first game I did was Fort Valley and Tuskegee. Okay. And I had Stan Luter was my analyst, and Laurencia was my also analyst. So what they were doing is on the women's game, we have a female analyst, And
Hmm.
on the men's game, we have a male analyst. And on the women's game, the male analyst is a sideline reporter. And on the men's game, the female who was doing the side color on the women's game will be the sideline reporter. So we still have three people traveling, but they will do two different roles. Uh, we will have a game, I think two games during the season, in which we will have a female play-by-play, which will be Laurencia, doing a couple games as a play-by-play announcer. Plus, we have a studio show with Takira Carter, and Nia Simone will do some of the studio shows also between the two of them. But it'd be the halftime show and what we call a crossover show, which airs between the women and men's game, and then the halftime of the men's game. So that's basically where we're going. We, of course, next year we're looking to expand even more. We're also looking for spring sports. We're going to do some spring sports this year.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
we're looking at either baseball in the SWAC. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Don't quote me on this. I know baseball is in the works, possibly. I know there's possibly some tennis in there. Uh, I know the SIC is part of that, and so is the CIAA in terms of spring sports. So we're looking at doing six spring sports between three different conferences, between the CIAA, SIC, and the SWAC.
Wow. That would be great, especially to have like tennis and baseball come to the forefront. I know they just announced today that they were going to have the HBCU uh, tournament over
Again,
at
in Houston.
yeah, in
Yeah,
Houston.
yeah.
So at Minute Maid Park.
Right.
So I had a chance to be a part of that last season, and hopefully we could be able to cover that again. Um, okay, so you guys are doing some tremendous work. Of course, you do tremendous work. Is there any advice that you would like to offer to these young budding journalists and broadcasters out there? Because let's be honest, I've had my hands and extended offers to guys before and young ladies, and they want the immediate exposure, the big thing. They want to get on big camera and have the four-letter crew names out there and everything else, but it takes time to be able to mature and evolve as a broadcaster as well as a journalist. So, what advice would you give to the young media professionals of today?
Well, what I've always told everyone in terms of wanting to get into this business, take advantage of every opportunity that's offered to you, no matter what it is. If they ask you to sweep the floors at the TV station, take the broom and sweep the floors because
That's right.
what happens? You're inside.
That's
And
right.
once you're inside, people know who you are. You may be sweeping the floors, but you also have the attention of the people who make decisions. If you're outside, still knocking on the door, they may not open it and let you in. But take advantage of every opportunity, whether it's an internship, whether it's being a runner, whether it's being a production assistant. You're not going to always just walk in the door and be on camera, be on the air, and be running the show. So you have to take advantage of whatever opportunities are afforded you. And that is what I always have offered to anyone trying to get into this business, especially now with social media being so prevalent. It's the jobs are out there. They're looking for
Mhm.
young people. I'm not going to be around forever. Somebody's going to be have to take my place one of these days. I'm still enjoying it as long as I have my health and sound mind and body. I don't have a problem continuing on. Like I said, 40 some years and doing it and still feeling good. I don't feel any worse today than I did 20, 30, 40 years ago. So
You're feeling
uh,
good and looking good, Charlie.
well, I appreciate it, but that's the advice I have to young people, and
Right.
I see them all the time. I talk to them, and when we go to the different campuses, I give them, and I even tell them, I said, here, you take my information. If I can help you in any way, shape, or form, you have any, if I give you any advice, any way, shape, or like I found Laurencia, Moten, rather, James Hadnot. These are people that I discovered and work with and in looking for them to continue to exceed in their profession. And you find these people out there and as long as they have the right mindset and are willing to sacrifice some of the things you need to sacrifice. You have to be on top of your game. You know, a lot of people think you just walk into the stadium and sit down and start talking about the game. Or you walk into the basketball arena and talk about the game. You don't realize the research and the homework that you need to do and have to do, and the time you have to spend preparing for the game. It's not like that. And I've had that happen with people, especially people in that are analysts who who've just come off the basketball floor as a player, playing either professionally or collegiately, and they want to be that analyst. They want to be that Doris Burke. You know, they want to be whoever the big analyst in basketball is or football, and they think you just walk in and sit down and start talking. Yes, they know the game, but they don't know the people playing the game, and that's the part that they have to get turned around in their head in order to be totally prepared to broadcast and know what's going on with that team. And so that's important. So, those are the things that you have to make sure you emphasize to those athletes and, or not necessarily athletes, but to those students, communication students. Ed Hill, who's a longtime communications, in charge of communications at Howard University, used to teach a class up there, and every year he'd have me come and speak to his classes at least twice a year. And those are the types of things I've always enjoyed doing, being able to go and speak to these communications and broadcast journalism classes and give my input and insight into letting them know what it takes to be successful and to be able to be there as a sounding board and answer the questions that they have.
Yeah, well, we need you over at Morehouse College. We are expanding the media programs there as well, from the journalism side to the broadcasting side, and we're adding some more layers this upcoming year. So we need to have you there. I'll talk to Dr. Thomas, tell him reach out to you because
Not
we
a
need
problem.
you at the house.
Not a problem.
Okay, last question. Going into what you have seen across HBCU sports, but also these NILs have been very, it's hard to manage for the NCAA, so to speak. And some of the states are having new legislations that may negatively impact HBCU schools, because if you have the student athletes as employees and you have to have all the other benefits and everything else that comes a part of being an employee, that can really put some of these sports and sports programs out of business at these schools. How do you see that working its way forward? Do you think that might be a problem? Because I know the four commissioners had conversations with Congress last week.
Yes, they did. They were in Washington, D.C., and as you said, they were up on the Hill talking about that. NIL, first of all, it all came about because the NCAA was so stingy. Didn't want a kid he couldn't even take his girlfriend out on a Friday night and buy a pizza, Yeah. So again, and your top athletes, they're benefiting from it. A lot of your HBCUs are not in position to have that same type of impact as far as the NIL portion of it is concerned. But a lot of the NIL comes from alumni and from the boosters. And that's where the NIL comes from. I was just talking to someone while I was in Las Vegas the other day, and they were saying how this one kid was offered $40,000 just to sign with the school. It was a Power 5 school, but the school's not paying him. He's not going to be an employee of the school, but they have those boosters with deep pockets who can guarantee this kid is going to get paid X amount of dollars to come and play for X university, and that's where the HBCUs may struggle a little bit in terms of being able to get those kids that same type of NIL type money. The big thing that's impacting everybody on the collegiate level is the transfer portal. I mean,
Yes.
December 1st, I believe, was when kids could start going into the transfer portal. And I think I just recently, close to 1,200 players in football alone are in the transfer portal as of today.
Yeah. I know it was over 3,000, but like you said, over with the football side, it could be over 1,200, and it was growing
Yes.
because we had more announcements coming in, filtering in throughout the HBCU landscape over the past couple of days as well. And some notable names of young
Yes.
men, especially the offensive lineman over at NCCU. I was surprised to see him, as well as a couple of the quarterbacks like Harold Blood from Southern University.
Mm-hmm.
He put his name in as well. So, um,
and we talked earlier about Andrew Body from
Andrew,
Texas
yes.
Southern going into the transfer portal.
Yeah, Andrew, it made me sad with Andrew because, again, that's a young man I built a relationship with over the past couple of seasons as well as knowing his mom and dad. So hopefully he doesn't go too far. That's all I would say there. But, Charlie, these young men and young ladies have an opportunity to support themselves through the boosters or alumni, through NILs. I think that's great for them because sometimes they used to have those undercover NILs back in the day, and you're aware of those as well.
Sure.
But their name, image, and likeness has prominence because some of these programs utilize their names and likenesses to be able to make millions of dollars. And I looked at the Reggie Bush situation because I also covered the New Orleans Saints for Sports Illustrated's Saints News Network. And I remember Reggie talking about how his university took everything down that had his image on and struck his name from the books and everything else. It's like Pharaoh did to Moses, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
he just got honored as
he just got honored.
He just went into the National Football Foundation Hall of Fame. The College Football Hall of Fame, yeah.
And I was just about to talk about that. He got honored, and they also promoted him from USC standpoint. They were behind him. Hopefully he gets his Heisman back as well because it was about what he did on the field, not what it was suspected off the field, which still hasn't really been proven. All right. The Celebration Bowl is coming up.
Yes.
2 storied programs, FAMU, Howard. Both of those guys have MEAC blood.
Yes.
And you covered those guys over the years. How special is it to see how Willie Simmons and his program, as well as Larry Scott and his program, be pitted against one another in the Celebration Bowl for the right to be said they are the best HBCU football program in the land?
Well, I think it's going to be one whale of a ball game. As you know, the SWAC has got to try to come back and win more than one Celebration Bowl since they've only won one since its inception.
Yeah.
And of course, Howard University has a lot to say to try to keep that MEAC streak going. Larry Scott, they just with him, like I said, he was down in Las Vegas with us the other day. In fact, after the ceremony, he took the red eye back because they had practice the next day.
Wow.
He didn't even stay overnight. He got on that red eye out of Las Vegas back to Washington, D.C. But, I'm looking forward to it. I've had a chance to see FAMU this year and last year with Jeremy Musa and that whole crew that they have down there. They do a fantastic job with their linebacking core. Their defense is pretty good. And they have a pretty good receiving core. But Howard University, they don't have to take a backseat to anyone. It was kind of interesting because I was hitting Kenny Gallup and I were laughing at the event the other day. And I was saying, I noticed when you all had 48 points on North Carolina Central the when you all played this year. You all didn't kick the extra point just to make it 49. You went for two. They said, yeah, we had to get them back, you know.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
again, this will be the first time that Howard and FAMU have played since FAMU left
That's
the
right.
MEAC and went to the Southwestern Athletic Conference. And it's going to be very interesting. I think it's going to be one whale of a ball game because both quarterbacks have had great years. They have good receivers, good defensive players. I don't even want to make a prediction in the game. I know they had a press conference. I believe it was earlier in the week.
No, today.
Oh, was it today?
Yes.
Okay. I know I saw something. I think Josh Padilla from FAMU just sent something over from the press conference. I just haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But yeah, you're right. I should because I do remember them saying that they were going down from some of the players were going down, or coaches down for the press conference. Larry Scott, he went home, and then he was going to fly to Atlanta for the press conference. And so again, I haven't had a chance to listen to it, but I know it's going to be one whale of a ball game, and it's worth just sitting back and watching. People say, "Are you going?" No, I'm going to sit home and watch it on TV where I can enjoy it.
Yeah. I think it's going to be full of drama. Plus, look, Willie Simmons, every program he's been a part of, from Prairie View to FAMU, he has done a tremendous job. And
I'm just wondering how long he's going to be able to stay there.
Yes, and I can talk to you about that as well. But anyway, look, I like Larry Scott too, because although that Howard would always cream the Morehouse Tigers, and
I think they're playing again this year up in New York.
Back up in New York for the Classic. Yes. I was there for the first one, but I tell you, I like the fact that those guys bounced back this year because they had a tough early start to the season.
They did,
and they bounced back, and that was a statement game against the Eagles. And I think this is going to be a lot closer than people give it. And but it could just very well be Willie Simmons's time. Okay, and let's just end on this note. I have one more question. HBCU Legacy Bowl. We have to go back to this. How important is it for these young people to understand that whole week that Shaq and Doug have laid out, from the HBCU Combine to the cultural events that they're going to get exposed to, from getting to know one another, the coaches behind the scenes, meeting the scouts, the NFL execs? How important is that for them? It's not just the game, but all of that encompasses the game, the whole event.
It's very big because, again, it's exposure that some of these young people would never, ever get an opportunity to experience. There are a couple kids that have been invited to other bowl games to play. There's one or two kids that may have been invited to the Combine in Indianapolis, the Hula Bowl, and some of the other games. But to get 120 players, that's what they're inviting, 60 from the two sides together from HBCUs to play and show what their possibilities are to the NFL, because all the teams will send their scouts there, and they will have what we call a mini combine among the HBCU players. And so senior eligible HBCU players that will be there. I mean, you got Jeremy Musos will be there. You've got Davis Richard will be there. You got Lupert Danellis will be there. And those seniors to show that they belong. Kenny Gallup has another year, so he won't be there from Howard University. But there's quite a few players that will be there to represent their universities and to represent HBCUs. And one of the thoughts behind this particular event, as you know, for a number of years, HBCU players from schools were not getting drafted, by the NFL. And this was an opportunity. Last year, even with this, there was only one player drafted. Everybody else that went in signed as a free agent.
That's right.
There was some that made teams, but they're not getting drafted. And that's the unfortunate part. And we know there are players out there that deserve to be drafted. That there's no reason why they should be signing as free agents or having to go play up in Canada.
Right.
Things of this nature. And that's what this whole week is all about, to bring more exposure, to let people know. Because, 40 years ago, where were you going? There was no, the HBCUs dominated their sport. Because a lot of the players from of the same skin color as you and I, they couldn't go to Alabama, they couldn't go to Ole Miss, they couldn't go to some of these schools. So the Gramblings and the South Carolina states and the Tennessee states of the world, and the Jackson states, they brought those players were recognized and drafted and pulled into the National Football League. Gil Brandt was part of our committee before he died, the HBCU Hall of Fame committee. Scott Pioli now is on the committee, and he's had a chance to scout people. Charles Garcia, who's a longtime scout in the NFL, is on our committee. So they can go back and talk about, and they know the history of what was happening as far as young men that played at historically black colleges and universities, and how they were being drafted left and right back in the 70s and the early 80s. And the 60s, but now you're in 2023, you're in a whole new era. And again, the competition, again, a lot of these kids who are going to Power 5 schools were going to HBCUs back then. But here's the other thing that stands out in my mind is that a lot of these coaches at HBCU sometimes fail to establish a relationship with what it may be known as a blue chipper, thinking, I don't have a chance at this kid whatsoever, so why am I going to waste my time with him? Right. You just never know, because things don't always work out at the Power 5. Okay, so Notre Dame is after you, but who else is going to Notre Dame with the same skill set that you have? And so you run a 4.240. There's a kid running a 4.15. You don't know anything about from the other part of the country. So when you get there, you become a number.
That's right.
There's 5 people for that one spot, that slot receiver spot, and you're one of 5. And when things don't work out and you're not happy, that coach that establish a relationship with you, you may be giving them that call when you decide to get in that transfer portal and decide it's not working out for me at Notre Dame. I can be a small fish in a big pond, or I can be a big fish in a small pond. So that's the key.
That's a good point, because that happened with Texas Southern this past year. Jace Wilson went up to Furman, didn't quite work out. His first offer, and Jace told me this, he said, Mr. Mosley, Coach McKinney gave me my first offer.
Yes.
From anybody. I remember that, still stayed in contact with him. And when he wanted to come back to Houston, he reached out to Coach McKinney and they brought him on. And look, the rest is history. SWAC Newcomer of the Year. No one ever would have thunk it that Andrew Body was going to not be able to stay throughout the whole year because he wasn't completely healthy. And look what has happened, and this kid's career may just go off. You never know with the next coach. It might be something tremendous, but relationships are
Jason when I was down there, talked to him and his dad. And
Coach Wilson.
Yeah. And I mean, just his dad's a great person, and Jason's just a joy to talk to, and very humble kid, and I just wish him the best.
Yeah, definitely. And, everything that Shaq and Doug has put together is for the benefit of these young people. I tried to, I think it was a couple of guys who decided to go, I don't have to go to the HBC Legacy Bowl because I have an invitation to East-West Shrine game, or one of the other, the Senior Bowl or something to that nature. And they kind of blew it off. And now it has come back to kind of haunt them in doing so. So it's very important to at least show up at least
Sure.
to meet these guys at the HBCU Legacy Bowl. And I keep on saying I have one more question, and this is my last question, Mr. Neal. Please, who were you in awe of interviewing when you first became a broadcaster and journalist in this business? Who were you
Muhammad
in awe?
Ali.
Muhammad Ali. Wow.
I actually have his shirt on today. It's
That's
ironic
right.
you say that, but he was one who, you know, and a lot of people did not really get a real feel for the real Muhammad Ali because what you saw on camera was not really Muhammad Ali. He was very boisterous and outgoing and, braggadocious, and he was going to do this and float like a butterfly and all of that. But if you got him away from all the cameras and just sit down, and he was a very calm, serene, humble individual, was not as boisterous like that. And that impressed the heck out of me,
Wow.
because you had one image one way, but then when you get a chance to really know the person, the image changed and my perception of him changed. And got the utmost respect from me.
Man, that's awesome. Ralph Cooper, you met him
Oh, yes.
with me after the game. Ralph's big break was George Foreman and his crew took him over to Africa for the Rumble in the Jungle.
Mm-hmm.
And during the transition, when George went down and was injured, they had some time. Ralph went over to Muhammad's camp and formed a relationship with Muhammad and those guys. And he's just told me some of those stories about these guys really were friends. They became friends later, but he said the relationship was really tense there, but all of us journalists, we had a chance to get to know one another and kind of help each other out. And I think that's one thing that's kind of lost today in some of the journalism ranks. And I know the National Association of Black Journalists does a great job every year with their convention, just trying to be able to bring people together and say, hey, we can work together in tandem instead of being Mr. Independent here, independent
Right.
there as well. Do you see where we need to have more connectivity within the broadcasting ranks and journalism ranks?
Well, I know years ago when I've covered the Super Bowl and the NBA All-Star game or whatever it might be, the journalists, the black journalists who were there, we would get together and go out and all have a dinner together.
Right.
So we had that camaraderie, whether it was Mike Wilbons and all of the people from USA Today and the various local newspapers. Because again, you got to remember, we go back in the 80s, late 80s, there weren't that many at different newspapers who were actually columnists who traveled to these sites or were assigned to cover these particular events. So it was very interesting, and I mean I can even remember covering Deion Sanders when he was playing baseball in the World Series,
Wow.
and he had a run-in with Tim McCarver,
Oh,
and
yeah, I remember
he was not talking to anybody, and we were up in Toronto, and I wanted to do an interview, and he would not do an interview with anybody but me, because I was the only black journalist that was there to do an interview. They told everybody else to stay away, and he came over and did an interview with me. So again, sometimes those things work out, but again, there were very few black journalists there at that particular time covering the World Series, and I was the only one that was there at that particular time. We were doing stuff for BET. I was working with BET at the time, and we would go to all of the different the Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball series,
Yeah.
World Series. We would go to the NBA All-Star game. We would go to the Super Bowl. We covered all those events as part of what we did at BET, and it was just great to have that camaraderie. And then I don't know if you remember back, we used to have a show called the Budweiser Sports Report, where we had
I do.
a roundtable discussion with all of these journalists would come in. And so we formed a bond there, among each other. To David Aldridge, to this day, we still communicate. James Brown, talked to him yesterday, with CBS Sports. Like I said, Mike Wilbon, Dave Dupree. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And we just maintain that friendship and that camaraderie throughout.
Wow, it's really important, because I know in HBCU land, I saw some of these young guys last season. They started squabbling among themselves, and for stories and all this other stuff. And I'm like, hey man, stop it, time out.
Right.
We got to work together,
Right.
because you never know, a year or two down the line, that you guys may have to really work together covering an assignment, whatever. So it's better to be able to kind of work and kind of iron out any differences now than let it fester and become a problem later on.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of problem. I don't know what kind of.
Just
I can't even imagine what that would be like. But anyway.
Petty beefing. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Well, man, this has been a pleasure. And Doug and Shaq were the first who granted me an interview when I started HBCU Legends 3 seasons ago. And to have you a part of HBCU Legends as one of the interviews is just great for me, that I had an opportunity to get to meet you and talk with you, but also now we could be able to give people an iconic interview so they could be able to relish from time on. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate you and everything that you've done. My dad used to love you. I can tell you, he was, as well as my uncle, they were avid sports fans and they thought the world of you. And that's how I was able to be introduced to the great Charlie Neal. I'm Kyle. You're welcome, sir.
Have a good holiday. Be safe.
You're welcome. I'm Kyle T. Mosley, HBCU Legends. That's Mr. Charlie Neal. Thank you, Charlie. You guys be safe and have a great holiday. We'll have more from HBCU Legends on Sports Illustrated covering the Celebration Bowl this coming week. Take care.